In the previous episode, we covered the bottom line of Russian objectives in Ukraine. In this video, I will give a modern day example for such a nation which compromised on its territorial integrity and is now much wealthier than its aggressor. And we will also discuss a likelihood of a peace deal. The Winter War was a war between Soviet Union and Finland. The war began with a Soviet invasion of Finland in November 1939 and ended 3.5 months later with the Moscow Peace Treaty in March 1940. Despite superior military strength, especially in tanks and aircrafts, the Soviet Union suffered severe losses and initially made little headway. The League of Nations, an organization similar to UNO, deemed the attack illegal and expelled Soviet Union from the organization. The onset of the war was because Stalin demanded some of the land from Finland. The St. Petersburg was only 32 kilometers from Finnish border, and this was too close for Stalin's liking. When Finland refused, Soviet Union invaded. Finland repelled the attack of Soviet and for more than 2.5 months inflicted heavy losses on Soviet Union. Soviet lost more than 4 times than the Finns. However, in a war of attrition, Soviet have the capability of fielding more men and putting more hardware. Hostilities ceased in March 1940 with the signing of the Moscow Peace Treaty, in which Finland ceded 9% of its territory to the Soviet Union. Soviet gains exceeded its pre-war demands. However, Finland retained its sovereignty and enhanced its international reputation. Finland decided to cede the territory and focused on nation building, resulting in a lasting peace following the conclusion of World War II. Finland remained neutral during much of Cold War and is now 4 times richer than Russia. Is Ukrainian leadership and its people willing for such a possibility to end the war and build a nation that is free from such geopolitical chess games? A recent nationwide poll released underlined the current mood of defiance across the country. Conducted in October by Kiev International Institute of Sociology, the survey found that 86% of the Ukrainians support the continuation of the military offensive and rejected any negotiation despite the escalation of airstrikes against civilian infrastructure. Therefore, it is safe to say that the Ukrainian morale is high and the appetite for resistance is strong. However, for any war to end, a peace deal has to be signed. Although Ukraine's military objectives are morally and legally justified, they may not be wise. In reaction to the recent Ukrainian successes, Putin has increased its efforts rather than decreasing them. The US would need to reckon that if the defense of Ukraine is not worth the American troops on the ground, is returning all of the Donbas and Crimea to Ukrainian control worth the risk of starting a global conflict? In Ukraine, Russia has already suffered a significant strategic setback, if not a total one. Kiev and NATO allies are obviously tempted to strive to defeat Russia and re-establish Ukraine's complete integrity, given the progress made by Ukraine on the battlefield. However, Putin's attempt to dominate Ukraine has already been unsuccessful, and calling for Russia's complete defeat is a gamble that is too dangerous to take. The West must facilitate a diplomatic effort to end the conflict and reach a territorial settlement between Ukraine and Russia as soon as possible. A hypothetical deal between Russia and Ukraine would have 3 components. First, Ukraine would abandon its desire to join NATO. Ukraine would formally adopt a neutral status, but it would continue to receive financial support from the West and move towards EU membership. Earlier in the war, Mr. Zelensky himself suggested that Ukraine neutrality could be part of the peace deal. Second and much harder part is that Moscow and Kiev have to arrive at a territorial settlement. A reasonable starting point for the negotiations would be a complete ceasefire along the whole line of contact and the opening of the shipping lanes in the Black Sea. Diplomacy could then focus on the ultimate disposition of Crimea and Donbas. Diplomats can surely be creative in an effort to find peace. Maybe a designation of a region controlled by Russia as an international zone where the residents are free to choose between either Russia or Ukraine passports. Another solution could be an implementation of a peace agreement in the style of the Dayton Accords. This will ensure Ukraine's territorial integrity but will leave a weak central government, as the case with Bosnia. As for the question of Crimea, there is no possibility that Russia will ever surrender Crimea and hence will be willing to go on an all-out war to defend the little peninsula. Therefore, any negotiation will happen on the question of Ukraine proper. A third part of the agreement would be an end to the sanctions against Russia, an unfreezing of international assets including Russian foreign exchange reserves. This would ensure that Russia has enough incentive to end the war and not pursue any more territorial ambitions in Ukraine. In conclusion, The compromise on both sides would be necessary for peace to exist. Russian goal at the start of the war to make Ukraine its client state has obviously failed. But Ukraine's maximalistic objectives cannot be implemented without a significant risk of escalation. Russian goals have significantly changed after the loss of thousands of troops in the battlefield. Russia will now look towards more territory inside Ukraine. Ukraine, on the other hand, can take a lesson from the history and follow Finland's example when it established its dominance over Soviet Union in the Winter War, but still gave up its territory to ensure a peaceful future that is more aligned to the Western ideals of liberty and freedom, and achieved prosperity over time and is now significantly richer than Russia itself. Transitioning from war to diplomacy offers hopes for stopping the killing and destruction, containing the growing risk of wider war between Russia and NATO, and reducing harm to the global economy. Even though such negotiations might fail to quickly produce a peace deal, but all parties should try nevertheless. As John F. Kennedy once said, "Above all, nuclear powers must avoid confrontation, that force an adversary to choose between a humiliating retreat and a nuclear war."
If you liked this video, please like, subscribe and share, as this would help and motivate me to make more content. Thank you and have a good day.